What's up, how? Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay still?
Yeah, we can hear you, Joe.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. Brynhoundar, Croeso, Mike Dwi. Good afternoon. I'm Mike and welcome to the Centre for Digital Public Services Lunch and Learn session, which is going to be on building inclusive and accessible digital services. This is the final chapter of our 6-part mini Lunch and Learn series on user-centered design. Just to let you know, if you have missed the previous episodes in this series, which we've covered a whole heap, we've covered from user research to content design, to service design, and a whole lot of in between. So if you've missed any of those, we do have a playlist on our YouTube channel, so we can share the recordings of those sessions with you. We will be recording today's session and again sharing this on our YouTube channel, so please turn off your camera if you don't want to be seen. And I'm delighted to say that today's session will be delivered by our Head of User-Centered Design here at the CDPS, Joanna Goodwin. So before we kick off and before I pass you on to Joe, I just wanted to see if we can get a little bit of things to warm things up. A couple of questions that we wanted to ask around inclusivity and accessible digital services. So if you can have your mobile phones or keypads at the ready, if you all join the Mentimeter, so you can go to menti.com or you've got a QR code there, and you enter the code 68280577. That's 68280577. Join Menti, and we have a couple of questions there that we'd like to kick things off. So the first question, which you should see on screen, and do let us know in the chat if there's something that you can't access. What words come to mind when you think of an inclusive and accessible service? So we'll leave you for that for a couple of minutes. Have a think. So what words come to mind when you think of an inclusive and accessible service? Brilliant. Yeah, starting to get some answers through there.
What sorts of words are coming through, Mike?
We've got equality, reachable, simple, clear, responsive, clarity, impartial, easy to access, global. Clear is the big word. Okay, brilliant. We'll share those on the screen in a minute. And the next question we've got is, who is responsible for building inclusive and accessible digital services within your organization? Who is responsible for building inclusive and accessible digital services within your organization? Again, this is a bit of a word cloud, open-ended, so do let us know. It's like a big consensus here. We've got everyone, everybody, anyone, developers, service owners, digital team. Interestingly, everyone but not a reality. Customer services, content team. Brilliant. Should I share my screen, Joe, and so you can start to, we can go back on, do you want to take it, should I take you back to that first one?
Yeah, that'd be great. I think really good to see that word cloud.
Okay. All right, there you go, Joe, if you see that. I'll pass over to you, Joe.
That's great. Yeah, really interesting to see some of those words coming through there. It's one of the first things I was going to pick up today, actually, is around there are so many words we can use when we think about inclusivity and accessibility. The words that come to mind are things like equality, equity, diversity, inclusion. There are just so many words that we could be using. I think the summary of what all those words mean is helping people to access products and services independently and with confidence. And I think that's just a real summary of what all these things are leading up to. That's great. Thanks, Mike. And yeah, I love that everyone is the biggest word there. I think there is a responsibility for everybody working in the public sector to be mindful of accessibility. There are specific roles and specific responsibilities. You mentioned there's a developer there, the digital services team. They will have specialist expertise in making sure that things are digitally accessible, but actually looking at it from a service perspective, from that end user perspective, really making sure that everyone's consciously thinking about how they can continuously improve on their services and make them more accessible and more inclusive all the time. Really good spread of words there. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate that. Okay, I think Elise is going to drive the slides. So I am in the very beautiful Anglesey today. I've got a gorgeous view of the mountains out the window, but what it's meant is that I've got some Wi-Fi problems. So Elise is going to drive the slides for me this morning. But we're going to go through them quite quickly. So we'll make sure there's plenty of time at the end. If there's any questions or if anyone wants to chat, please do jump in at the end. So when we were talking about all those different words that come to mind when we think about accessibility and inclusion, coming back to that, all these words, what they mean is allowing people to confidently and independently access services and products. There's not a tick box approach that can do that. We're working with real people and perfect doesn't exist. There's no such thing as being perfectly accessible or completely inclusive because there is so many fragmented approaches to that. So what we're looking for is making products and services more or less inclusive to as many individuals as we can. So it's a slightly controversial approach. There's not a tick box exercise. We're not looking to develop our services against a range of characteristics or specific demographics. What we're looking at is focusing on what user needs and ensuring that people have that confidence to complete their services. So if we move on to the next slide, what the whole message around it is focusing on the user. So there'll be no surprise that I'm here as head of user-centered design and that actually we're developing our services, our products for people. So when I talk about that, it's starting with the user in all of our decisions. People will have different preferences as well as different needs, and designing our services around those user needs, around those requirements, understanding the behaviours and motivations rather than their demographics or their characteristics will really help us to meet those needs and deliver better products and services. There's usually no alternative to using public services, so we have to make sure that they work for as many people as possible. And if we roll on to the next slide, what that means is that we're designing to ensure that no one gets left behind. I'm going to talk through in just a second why it's really important and a bit of kind of like what accessibility and inclusivity looks like in Wales today. I'm going to talk them through a case study, but the whole focus of the next kind of 20 minutes or so is to ensure that we don't leave people behind, that we're consistently mindful that people may have different needs and different preferences, and we don't want to leave people behind. We want to bring people on a journey. What that means is we have to be flexible and we have to be curious, remaining curious and open to having different solutions. We can't fit working with people, we can't fit everyone into kind of really easy boxes. So our services have to be flexible. There isn't going to be a single user journey for any one of our services. People will find our services in different ways, whether that's talking to the mums on the school playing field, through to a Google search, or through a formal route like getting a letter from your housing association. People will find our services in different ways. They'll then want to engage with us and interact with us in different ways. And that's not just online and using digital mechanisms, that's offline as well. And it's really important. Vic talks through this a lot in her service design, Lunch and Learn, around designing service end-to-end from a user perspective and recognising that people don't live their lives and they don't experience services through a single channel or through a single mechanism. So having that end-to-end process is really, and kind of mapped out, is really important. Okay, so we'll move on to why. Why are we here today? Why are we talking about this? So the first reason, moving straight into it, I'm going to go through these really quickly, is as human beings, we're hugely diverse and we have so many different characteristics. It's just amazing. It's the really exciting part of this talk. When we talk about accessibility, there are 4 main types of disabilities we're thinking of, and to consider the wide range of needs that people might have. So the first one there is impaired vision. So this could be someone who's completely blind. It could be someone who's colourblind. It could be with someone partially sighted. It could be with someone with a very specific visual impairment as well. And so how they interact and engage with our services may be different. Motor difficulties, you could be missing an arm. You could be a wheelchair user, for example. So motor difficulties will allow you to access services in different ways physically. Cognitive impairments or learning disabilities. This is very important when we're talking about situational or short-term impairments as well. Lots of people have cognitive, and I'm sure we can all relate to this when we're highly stressed or in a stressful situation, when we're not performing at our best. We don't think as clearly. The cognitive impairments and learning disabilities is such a wide range of needs, and that's not just kind of permanent disabilities and people's permanent needs, but that can be situational as well, and we'll talk about that in a second. And deafness or impaired hearing as well. And so that can be from fully deaf to having slightly impaired hearing. But there are 14.6 million disabled people in the UK. So moving on to the next slide, we're going to dive into those different people in different ways. So the Disability Charity Scope shares that at least 1 in 5 people in the UK have a long-term illness, impairment or disability. So that could be any one of those different types of needs that those people are experiencing. And they will all have unique and different ways of interacting with our services and completing end-to-end service experience. Moving on to the next slide, we also consider that not all disabilities are permanent. So there are short-term disabilities as well. And research shows that 1 in 2 people will be disabled or have additional needs at some point in their lifetime. And this could be anything from a broken arm or needing to use some assistive technology to things like having cataracts removed. So you've got short-term visual impairments, short-term hearing difficulties. So short-term and temporary disabilities is something as well. And this could be anyone that we work with can have a short-term need, additional need to what we usually experience. And then finally, in terms of having that situation barriers as well. So we know that designing for accessibility makes it better for everyone because we all have different contexts and we don't live in a one-size-fits-all situation. So this is things such as, and I'm going to use the drop curb analogy, that drop curbs were originally created for wheelchair users, but they're also helpful for those people who are doing deliveries using a little truck. They're also useful for people using push chairs, that sort of thing. When we talk about hearing situations, and it's probably one that we can all really relate to, is that somebody who's deaf will experience and listen to things like audio or video in a very different way to what we would expect them to. But actually, when you're in a busy office or on a busy train, or you haven't got your headphones that day, so you just don't want the sound on, you experience it in a very similar way. So coming back to it, it's not about characteristics or demographics, but it's about understanding different people's needs, motivations and behaviours. Because when we look at it from that perspective, we make it more inclusive and we improve it for everybody. There was some work done recently around font sizes on emails and how making the font size a little bit bigger is better for those with visual impairments, but it also makes it really a lot easier for anyone who's on a mobile phone out and about and trying to catch up with their emails in a busy environment. So moving on to the next slide, that's a little bit about accessibility. I'm now going to talk just a little bit about inclusion and digital exclusion. So it's not just about accessibility being inclusive, it also means people can't always access the services in the way we expect them to. So in Wales, we have a higher proportion of our population that's excluded digitally, with 7% of the population, it's 180,000 people not being able to use the internet on a day-to-day basis. And going on to the next slide, that means 41% of people over the age of 75 have basic digital skills. So we have to be very mindful about making assumptions for people's abilities when using our services in a digital way. And the next slide. And we're going to talk around this in a little bit more detail in a minute, but digital exclusion also includes those families and individuals with lower income. So this may be that they can't afford same devices, the same broadband packages, or the connectivity as well. So we can't make assumptions that people have access to devices and connectivity as well when we're designing our services. Next slide, please. I'm here in Anglesey today and we were already talking about connectivity issues. So people living in rural areas are not always online. And also in terms of broadband provision, I'm going to use my experience today as an example here. It's if I was going to be doing a really long, difficult online service application or process today, it'd be really frustrating when that broadband keeps dipping in and out. So again, it can be any of us. Being inclusive and accessibility doesn't just mean, putting these people into boxes and people like this or people with these specific needs. People do live in different parts of these circumstances on a day-to-day basis. Next slide, please. The final why. Why are we talking about accessibility and inclusion? So it is a legal requirement as well. So those are all I've just listed off a load of reasons why we should be really mindful and keep working towards making ourselves more inclusive and more accessible. But it is also a legal requirement. So we do have the Digital Accessibility Act, which came into force, I believe, 2018. And we also have the Equality Act in 2010 as well. So as a public sector, we do have legal requirements to make sure that our services are fully accessible and inclusive. Next slide, please. I'm going to come back now to what we're here to do is ensure that nobody gets left behind. So although we have to do it as legal, we should do it. There's lots of people out there with situational, temporary and permanent needs. But what we're really trying to do is we all want to deliver better services. We all want to do our jobs in the most effective, efficient ways. And by doing that, it means that we don't leave people behind. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to take just the next 5 minutes to talk through a real life example. So it's great talking about the theory, looking at statistics, but actually when we put ourselves in other people's shoes, and we're doing a lot of work at CDPS around cost of living at the moment, it makes it more meaningful and more tangible. So next slide. Around 3 in 4 adults worry about the rising cost of living and personal well-being. So people are struggling at the moment. I think to set the context for this case study, we know that I was talking earlier around cognitive needs. We know people are worried, people are anxious. 3 in 4 adults have got that thing in the back of their mind, which maybe doesn't allow them to think and respond to situations as they would do if they weren't feeling anxious or worried. Next slide, please. So going into poverty in Wales. So I'm going to run through these super quickly. So around a quarter of people in Wales are classed as in poverty. Around 3 in 10 children are living with poverty in Wales today. And we know in Wales we have the lowest medium hourly pay as well. So and that's compared to the rest of the UK. So we know that we have a problem with poverty in Wales. And I'll get to what this means in terms of accessibility and inclusivity in a minute. Next slide, please. So what that means is in Welsh households, 1 in 8 don't have enough for the basics. 4 in 10 are going out without heating. 1 in 4 eating smaller meals, and 28% of people borrowing money. 13% of people living in Wales today are in arrears on at least one of their household bills, and 11% are concerned about losing their home in the next 3%. So if you think that's more than 1 in 10 people are concerned about having a home in the next 3 months in Wales today. Next slide, please. And it's worse for people with additional needs. So Scope is a charity who works directly with disabled people. Traditionally and kind of as a whole, people who live with long-term disability have more struggles. They have more financial challenges, and they've been working through what we deem as some of the cost of living crisis for long periods of time. But more recently, they're eating less and more going hungry. So when we think about how we're designing services, those with disabilities are struggling more. They're washing with flannels instead of having a bath, shower. They're reducing their care hours to allow them to work more and to have less care, so that they pay less for the caring hours that they have. And what that results in is they're getting sick more and they're in more pain as well. So how we design and deliver our services affects people differently, and those that are most vulnerable are affected in more extreme ways. Next slide, please. And we know within this context, with all those families that are really struggling, we know that people aren't claiming. So there's some statistics on the slide, I won't talk through all of them, but we know that in the UK today, families that are eligible for these benefits and services are not claiming the money that is available to them, despite struggling, despite not being having enough food, heating, or access to connectivity. Next slide, please. And the reason for those people not claiming what they want, what they need, is for them. The top one there is information provision. People are unaware of what's available to them, and when they are aware, the information is very difficult to understand and very difficult to navigate. It's normally an overwhelming wave of information they have to process. There's an unwillingness to claim, and this is related to stigma, and this is also from a lot of kind of political media from the 90s and before that as well, around people not needing to claim and can you do your bit for the government, which was a lot of campaigning around the 90s, and that stigma still lives on today. People who are vulnerable with changing circumstances as well have additional hurdles as well. And so, as I mentioned before, those that are most vulnerable had it worse. And the next slide really talks about, and why I thought this was a really important case study to bring to talk about accessibility and inclusivity, because the people who aren't claiming the benefits and services that are available to them are some of these kind of less represented groups. So you can see there who doesn't claim a Black, Asian and minority ethnic households in low wages. There's a huge amount of challenge around those families that are in employment but are in low wages, so they're eligible for benefits and services, but they don't know they are because they're working, but they're not working and they're struggling. People who have suffered domestic violence tend not to claim what the things that they're eligible for. Households with disabled children or adults, older people and carers, people with mental health conditions, they can really struggle to kind of navigate all that information and then understand it once they've got it. It's, we've talked a lot around kind of them saying, actually telling people like scope, it's often not worth it and it makes me feel worse. So that's a really important piece to remember. And people in relationship breakdown also tend not to claim what they're eligible for. So next slide, please. Coming back to this key message, the whole reason we're talking about accessibility and inclusivity today is that we don't want people to get left behind. We just shared a quick case study on how we are leaving people behind and how the services that we're delivering in Wales today are leaving people behind. So how can we be more inclusive, more accessible and open up more services so that people can get access to the things that they need and want. So how are we going to do that? Next, if I skip over to the next slide again, please, Elise. We do have the digital service standards in Wales. So they're on the screen at the moment. The first 5 of the digital service standards are around meeting user needs. So they support you to not think about just today, but to think about how can we create sustainable, lasting change as part of the future wellbeing for people in Wales. They also help us to design bilingually. We know there's a huge challenge around language in Wales, particularly around bilingual services and having equal access to services in both English and Welsh. We talk about understanding user needs, going right back to what I was saying at the start. We can't always design for specific characteristics or demographics, but we can design around user needs and consider people's behaviours, motivations and needs in those contexts. Providing that joined up experience really talks you through there, helping you to think about online and offline channels and how people go through that end-to-end journey, and making sure that everyone can use the service. Talks you through some of the accessibility stuff, which in the next slide we'll talk about as well. Alongside this talk today, we are publishing a whole range of tools and tips. I mentioned right at the start that you can't kind of tick box accessibility and inclusivity, but there are lots of things you can do that are small and will make a significant difference. So in there, in the micro skills that we'll be publishing, we'll have things like how to understand what colour contrast means, not just from contrast perspective, but also to people with maybe colour blindness issues, or how can we not only use colour to show meaning behind our decisions. We're talking a lot around content, readability, accessible content, how to make sure that what you write on the website is more than just factually accurate, but actually really accessible and open, and so that people can easily understand it. We're also talking about inclusive language and best practice. We've got some recent guidelines there around some of the kind of words to avoid, that sort of thing. A lot of research happening at the moment around neurodiversity and designing for cognitive ease. Lots of practical tips and advice whenever you're using images, GIFs, icons, emojis, animation, those sorts of things, and also with video and audio as well. So we've got a lot of stuff that can help within those kind of skills that we'll share with you. If there's anything that you can add to it, you know, this is a community approach as well, please let us know. We'd love for you to input to that. And finally, if there's anything you want to learn about accessibility or you want to run anything by us, you want us to have a quick chat around what your service or project is doing today, we're here at CDPS as well. You can come and talk to us. Okay, we're going to move quickly on to the final set of slides. I know I'm conscious of time and I can talk all day about this. The last thing I wanted to say is going right back to what I said at the beginning. Accessibility isn't perfect. There is no such thing as a fully accessible or fully inclusive product or service. It's only as accessible or inclusive to a range of individuals, which means we can keep learning and improving. I did this in central government a few years ago when I wrote the first ever accessibility guidelines for social media. Since then, they've grown legs, they've been evolved, adapted and expanded, and we can do that here in Wales as well. Talking to some of our visual designers this week alone around how can we make really inclusive, accessible, bilingual data visualizations, that sort of thing. There's a real gap in that space at the moment. We can drive that, we can lead on that, and we can kind of improve on the best practice that is already out there. So please do, if you've got ways to contribute and add to this, get in touch with us, let us know. And I'm going to leave you with a final few words from people that are way smarter than me, just to kind of really hit home some of the kind of key messages I was hoping to get out of this session. So the first one is from a very famous scientist, you've probably all heard of him. The important thing is to not stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing. And I really wanted to pull this quote. It's something I used to have on my desk many years ago when I was in an office environment. But curiosity is so important. We've seen how inclusive design and inclusivity is continuously growing. Over the last few years, the whole kind of conversation has really opened up further. And the only way we can continue getting better and improving is by keep being curious, keep learning from each other, and keep on improving on that. The next quote is from one of my favourite TED Talks people, from Brené Brown. So integrity is choosing courage over comfort. So it's in choosing what's right over what is fun, fast or easy. And it's practicing our values and not just professing them. So I thought this quote was really important because it's really easy to do a quick accessibility audit or run it through an accessibility checker or kind of do a tick box exercise of have I used the right words in this? That's fast. It can be quite easy and can make some quite quick changes, which I really encourage those kind of quick wins. But actually making it fully inclusive and accessible, it's hard. We're talking about people. We're talking about people that have a variety of different ways of accessing services. So really being true to our values and being courageous in asking some difficult questions or challenging our assumptions. And then the final quote I wanted to leave you with is Simon Sinek. The hardest part is starting. As I shared with you, there's a lot of things we can start doing today. There's quick wins, there's small incremental changes that will make a difference to somebody. Once you get started, you'll find the rest of the journey much easier. So kind of the message I wanted to leave us with today was on the final slide, which is what can we do today? You as people working in the Welsh public sector, what can you do today to make your service more accessible or more inclusive? And how could you be curious about that? And I'll hand back to you, Mike. Thank you, everybody.
Diolch yn fawr, Joe. Fantastic. Thank you. Really informative that session. And oh my God, so much to get your head around and unpack here in just 30 minutes. But you did a great job. So as Joe mentioned in her talk, thanks to our new and dedicated user-centered design team at the Centre for Digital Public Services, we have come up with hundreds of different things that you can do that can take half an hour or less just to help you start unpacking all of this and taking away those assumptions and new skills you can take on board. So we will make sure that we send a link to this session's takeaway resource and previous topics we've covered in our follow-up communications. So keep an eye out for that. And I just want to say, I think, you know, the biggest takeaway, like from all the talks that we've had over the last 10 weeks plus, is that, you know, small changes can make a big difference. So, you know, don't feel daunted by all of this. You know, we're here at Centre for Digital Public Services to help you along the way. So if you want us to come and talk to your organisation, please get in touch. We're building a new website at the moment, so to make things really inclusive and accessible to you all in terms of resources that you can take away, whether you can have that in a video format, whether you want it in a, you know, in an easy to read HTML format. We're going to make sure that we're there to help you with really understanding how we can build services that with our users are right at the heart and center. So thank you so much, Joe. This is the end of the series, but it doesn't mean that we're going to leave it there. So our plan is we're going to send out a survey to all the people that have attended our Lunch and Learn series over since we started these in January, and we are going to look at picking some up again in May, but we will be asking you what you would like to see covered. So keep an eye out for that survey, and we will be in touch then with hopefully launching a new series in May that will take us right up until the summer. We're keeping them on a Monday, running them every fortnight. If those times are not working for you, please let us know as well. We can see what we can do. But before we go, if we can log back into Menti before you leave us, we will just do a little bit of a feedback, and looks like you've already started to answer some of those questions. Yeah, so how much do you agree, disagree with the following statements? The Lunch and Learn made sense to me. I learned something new today about building inclusive and accessible digital services. I would like to start building inclusive and accessible digital services in my organization. I am confident about how to access information and support, and I still have questions. So brilliant. And we definitely still want you to have questions. We wouldn't have done our, you know, we want to make sure that there is still lots of questions out there for us to help you with. Has anyone got any questions that they want to come in before we wrap things up? No, brilliant. Well, if that's it, I'd like to thank everyone here today, and have a great afternoon and have a great rest of the week, and we'll be in touch soon. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr. Thanks, everyone.